July 13th, 2024, this man was all over the news. The USA former President Donald Trump was shot at the presumptive Republican nominee for the 2024 presidential election. Trump was taken away by Secret Service at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania after a bullet hit his right ear. At this moment, President Trump is fine, but the question is, why do they want him dead? Will reveal the behind-the-scenes concerns that many powerful people had about Trump's impact on global stability. From the moment he took office, he sent shockwaves around the world. What is it that makes so many global leaders leery of Trump's return? Well, the truth is much more complex. Trump's America First policy often clashed with international cooperation. Some of his tweets moved markets or triggered diplomatic incidents. Countless world leaders had to remain on tenterhooks, trying to brace for whatever he'd say or do next. As world leaders struggled to deal with Trump's unpredictability, a new battlefront was opening at home, one that would redefine the way Americans value information and influence. You've heard people say the phrase fake news before, but do you really understand its origins and how it split a country apart? He immediately adopted an adversarial posture toward the mainstream news media when he entered office. All bad press was spun as fake news, a phrase that would later be characterized as his war chant against dissenting stories. However, the stakes were higher for those two than simply talking back to haters. The damage caused by Trump's constant insistence on using the phrase was not confined to just his rhetoric. Something interesting started to happen as Trump began ramping up his attacks on the press. It increasingly became the case that Republicans and Democrats were looking at news in fundamentally different ways. Republicans, following Trump's lead, became increasingly skeptical of mainstream media outlets. Democrats, on the other hand, maintained their trust in a broader range of news sources. And this difference of trust was not small. It became so wide that it divided society into two pieces that do not overlap in the slightest. Moreover, this war was not limited to fact-checking, separate refute speakers, but this was not the whole problem. The very nature of conversation in this country has been undermined. How can we talk to each other if we are not only watching different news and shows but cannot even agree on basic facts? Such a situation is not only about differences in politics. When a significant portion of the population believes that mainstream news sources are deliberately lying to them, how can we have a functioning democracy? This loss of confidence in the media has consequences. Example, the COVID-19 pandemic. The problem, in essence, began with a two-word phrase, fake news, and America's response to a worldwide health emergency was hindered as a result. Translation: the next time you see somebody try to brush off a news story as fake, think of it all against the backdrop of a media war that has been ringing since Trump was first elected. A war that has changed how we view truth itself for Americans, and one the consequences of which will be felt for decades. Trump may have divided America with his time in office, but its consequences reverberated around the world. Global confidence in U.S. leadership hit record low during Trump's time in office. However, this was not the case in every country. Take Germany, for instance. Trump had only 13% of Germans saying they were confident in his leadership. That is less than the confidence they expressed in leaders such as Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping. The same story went for the other main European nations. Confidence was also low in Mexico, a country most affected by Trump's policies. Only 8% of Mexicans said they had confidence. Indeed, some demonstrated remarkably high levels of trust in Trump. An example country of this is Israel. The highest share of confidence is in Israel, where 71% believe in Trump. Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, a pro-Israel policy action favored naturally among Jewish Americans, causing this figure most likely being so high. The stark divisions of opinion demonstrated by different countries surrounding Trump's leadership resulted in a complex and mostly unknown global order. It strained age-old friendships, reconfigured geopolitical realities, and made many of the world's most powerful leaders uncertain about where they stood with America. So, while Trump's presidency certainly shook things up at home, its ripple effects were felt around the world. From the streets of Berlin to the halls of power in Manila, Trump's leadership reshaped how the world viewed America, for better or for worse. Domestically and internationally, Trump was a president who brutally divided opinions. His presidency sent shockwaves abroad, not least because of the nature of its foreign policy. You probably thought you knew the half of it, but there was more to Trump's America First style than met our eyes. First of all, Trump's very controversial foreign policies. His time in office would impose many surprises on an unsuspecting public. Are you aware of the Paris Climate Agreement? Donald Trump withdrew from it, making the U.S. an outlier among all other countries in the world, working to address climate change on a global scale. This was not only about the environment, it represented a statement regarding America's position in the world. Then, there were the tariffs. Trump levied steep tariffs on the Chinese, European Union, and even close allies such as Canada. He dubbed it fair trade, but most called it the opening shot of a potential trade war. These decisions didn't just affect big corporations, they had real consequences for everyday people, from farmers in the Midwest to factory workers in Germany. However, this is where it starts to get really interesting. For all the flack Trump got for his foreign policy, it dramatically reset entire alliances. A cornerstone of global security since World War II, NATO, the military alliance that has bound North America and Europe together in mutual defense for decades, he assailed other NATO members for not paying their fair share and suggested the U.S. could refuse to help allies attacked on its own soil, from Aleppo or Warsaw alike. This method sometimes gave the impression to extensive standing U.S. allies that they could not depend on. Even allies that had depended upon America's backing for generations were now asking whether they could trust their long-standing friend. It is akin to getting to a party only for you to doubt if your mirror image did not invite itself. However, not everyone was displeased with Trump foreign policy. For others, this change was an opportunity to work with America in a new way. For example, the increased gap in U.S. relations with its old partners such as Russia. Meanwhile, certain other leaders of the European populist right began to converge with Trump nationalism. At the same time, countries alienated from America during his term found themselves in a different place. China, of course, immediately saw their version of daylight as the U.S. retreated from its unique leadership role in world affairs and began applying tariffs on everything coming to America, creating an opening for China to exert own influence globally. Some unexpected things happened in the Middle East on Trump's watch. Some rejoiced at his decision of moving the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, while others criticized it as a provocative act. But Trump's America First policies didn't only invert U.S. foreign policy priorities, they turned those of other nations on their heads too, fundamentally changing the way that many countries around the world encountered and responded to us. And those shifts did not disappear when Trump was driven from Washington. The effects of his foreign policy decisions still resonate in international politics, leaving world leaders wondering what role the United States will play on a global scale moving forward. While foreign dignitaries weighed their reactions to Trump's diplomacy, a more tempestuous affair was already underway at home, and its repercussions would rattle American democracy. The 2020 election and the events that followed brought to light fissures in U.S. institutions long believed indestructible. Let's start with the basics. This is how elections are supposed to work, right? People vote, and then the votes are counted, and a winner emerges. The 2020 election, however, was anything but straightforward. As the votes rolled in, a strange thing happened. President Trump, who was behind both in the vote tally and Electoral College asterisk, declined to settle. This was more than a grudge. It also wasn't just another butthurt clerk. His rejection of the results from Trump set off a ripple effect throughout all levels of government. Rather than merely dispute the outcome, he declared that the election had been stolen from him in its entirety. Trump, after his loss to Biden in 2020 presidential elections, alleged the votes count and filed some lawsuits against it in various states. They alleged there had been massive cheating, even while the U.S. officials and international monitors said it was a clean election. These legal battles were something more than a historical footnote. They represented an assault on the very basis of this nation's electoral system. The ruling had consequences outside the courtroom as well. The electric charges of the accounts and media platforms lectured by Trump flooded a slow-moving, ergo-worthy social swarm. 2020 election aftermath had ripple effects beyond just the immediate transition of power. That, in turn, left a lasting imprint on American democracy and its institutions. It was not how Trump performed on the international stage that terrified so many of our allies. It was the fundamental nature of his performance. First, let us examine Trump's unconventional diplomatic strategy. Twitter and late-night tweets beat traditional diplomatic protocols and practices. For example, modern world leaders had no idea what the American president would say next, or if it would be something wholly unexpected. Hence, it results in how to maintain a meaningful relationship with someone whose beliefs and values might change from one moment to the next. However, it was more than just the absence of understanding. Ansible, he and his advisors deemed the America First policy to take precedence over decade-old SA relationships, agreements, and alliances. For example, NATO leaders had no idea how much they could rely on U.S. TAR support. Why would Trump commit to a pre-war alliance based on what he considered obsolete geopolitical doctrines and theories? This wasn't just a minor disagreement, it was a fundamental shift in how America interacted with its allies, it did not affect only defense-related global cooperation. The U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement by President Trump was a source of concern for international relations. It was at least as much about climate policy as it did not signal that the U.S. would continue to be a reliable partner on global matters. World leaders in countries that rely heavily on trade with the U.S. found themselves scrambling to decide how to look ahead. But perhaps the most chilling part for many world leaders is that it looks like America recently welcomed an authoritarian regime. His warm relationships with leaders like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un raised eyebrows across democratic nations. It wasn't just about personal relationships. It signaled a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy priorities that could destabilize long-standing global power dynamics. Those worries weren't just in her head. These had real-world consequences in terms of how countries engaged with America. It has led some countries to start looking for better ties with China or Russia as a sturdier partner. The rest began to forge more robust regional networks, laying the groundwork for a world in which it seemed America might not be leading. The trust deficit also spilled over to sharing of intelligence. These countries said they were made extra cautious after Trump had public fallouts with his intelligence agencies. After all, if the president of the U.S. did not trust his own intelligence community, how could other nations be confident that their shared intel would be properly treated? Taken together, these circumstances created a set of fears among the international elite that went well beyond garden variety policy differences. This wasn't merely a rejection of Trump's actions, it was an existential confusion about America and its place in the world.